Hi friends, and welcome to another episode of pianoTV. So today we are going to build on some of the stuff we talked about in the last video on pentatonic scales. So in that video, I'll link it on the screen here if you haven't seen it, but we talked about what a pentatonic scale is and why they're super useful for improvising and jamming. So what we're going to do today is dip our toes into composition, and we're going to cover some of the basics, and we're going to use the pentatonic scale as kind of our guidepost. We're going to just use the black keys and basically write a song on the black keys. I've written a song for this video. You can click below and find the sheet music for it, or go to the blog pianotv.net, where you can download the PDF and check it out. You can use it as a reference or as a launching point for your own composition. So let's get started. So the pentatonic scale we'll be using today is the G flat major pentatonic scale, which kind of sounds intimidating because it's like G flat, but it's super simple because it really is just only the black keys, and G flat is your home base. So in my mind, the easiest way to come up with a melody is to first figure out some chords. I think it's kind of tough to come up with good sounding melodies just out of thin air, but if you have chords as a harmonic background, it will give your melody more context and just kind of make it easier to jam out ideas. So as for what chords to use, well, if we're in the key of G flat is going to be the most important chord. It's going to kind of sound like your home base. It's going to serve as like your launching pad for all your ideas. So I'm going to mark this with Roman numeral I, which basically just means 1. Your second most important chord is going to be the fifth one, which I'm going to mark with Roman numeral V, which just means 5. And these are the tonic and dominant chords. We've talked about this before. The tonic and dominant chords are going to be like the strongest chords in pretty much any key in any song, so I really like to use those. And the third chord that I use in my tune, I only use 3 chords, I kept it really simple, is the 6th one, which I'm going to mark with VI or 6. So I did it in lowercase because when you form this chord, it's actually going to end up being an E flat minor, not an E flat major. So that just kind of, it creates a sense of contrast to throw a minor chord in there in the mix. But overall, like you could probably use a couple other chords, but in general, try to just stick to 4 chords or less for now, just so you're not like super overwhelmed. And like I said, I only use 3 in this whole song. So here are the 3 chords that I use in my pentatonic song. I use G flat, E flat minor, and marked with like a lowercase m for minor, and D flat major. These basically just cycle over and over, but you can see the way I did the chords is I didn't just plunk down solid chords for the song. So what I opted for instead was a broken chord pattern. I even went outside the chord box a little bit. So instead of just playing G flat and D flat and then a B flat in here like a standard G flat major chord, I added a little E flat at the end here, which isn't in the chord itself, but it adds a little something. Honestly, when you're writing on a pentatonic scale, there aren't really any wrong notes. I could write a left-hand pattern in any manner of ways, but what I did end up using was something like this. So I started with a G flat chord variation, then I moved to an E flat minor chord variation, and then I finished with a D flat chord variation. And then later on the songs, I started exploring 1-5-8, which is a really simple but super useful broken chord pattern, just the 1st, 5th, and 8th notes if you kind of count them all out. And throughout the song, I really just focused on those 3 chords. So G flat, E flat, and D flat. So now that we got some basic chords all figured out, it's time to shift our focus to melody writing. Melody writing is an intense topic, and there's lots of books and giant tomes all dedicated to the theory of melody writing and all that. So we're only going to scratch the surface here today. I'm just going to share with you a few tips that I find really useful as a starting point if you're just kind of getting into composition. Writing music is a lot like book writing, and we could talk about theory all day long, but at the end of the day, what I think is really important is developing an instinct for it. And what I mean by that is just getting a sense of what works and what doesn't, as opposed to applying strict theory to like every little piece that you do. And the best way to develop this instinct, honestly, is to just listen to a lot of music and play a lot of music, because then you're going to start, even if you're not conscious of it, you're going to start being able to hear different patterns and consistencies. By listening to a lot of music and playing a lot of music, you're going to start developing your own instinct as to what sounds good and what works and what doesn't. So that being said, there are a few pieces of more concrete advice I can give you. So the first one, keep it simple. This is the main problem I see when people start to explore songwriting for the first time, is people tend to get super excited and way too adventurous. And the melodies often include like huge leaps and there aren't any patterns and they're just kind of all over the place. But if you spend a bit of time listening to melodies, like pop music is a really good example as a starting point, just because it's generally simple. The singers usually don't span more than an octave. Like there's a lot of songs even that just exist within the span of 3 notes. So pop music is great as a reference for how to keep it simple. And that's not to say that you can't or shouldn't write complicated songs with like huge sprawling melodies, but it's generally wise to understand the basics before attempting like anything super crazy and complicated. Like masters can make it sound interesting, but when beginners do it, it generally just sounds kind of random. So number 2, include rhythmic patterns. Patterns are your friend in music. I don't like making sweeping statements like all songs have rhythmic patterns, every song in the universe, but I mean, it's basically true. There can be like, they can be long or short patterns. It can be like a bar long pattern. It can be a 4-bar pattern. It doesn't really matter, but the fact that there is a pattern does matter. Almost all music has some sort of rhythmic unity. You can see this with my little pentatonic song. So not only does the left hand have a consistent pattern, 2/8 notes and a dotted half note, but you'll notice within these phrases, there is a lot of rhythmic repetition. In this song, like you can see, I use what you could call a call and response pattern or like an echo technique, which is basically like if you look at these notes, they're exactly repeated a second time. So it's like this part is echoing this part. And you can see that again over here. It's basically the same thing. It ends a little bit different, but you can see this is like the first pattern. This is the echo. This is a pretty common and effective songwriting technique. It's really easy to do, and it helps create a sense of unity in the song. So the last point here is look at the forest, not just the trees. And I actually want to spend a minute to talk about this because I think it's really important and maybe a little bit difficult to explain. So just bear with me here. So what I find often happens with beginner songwriters is there's a fixation on like small tiny units, like maybe a little 1-bar melody that's like E, G, E or whatever, but you don't necessarily think about it within the context of the rest of the song. So like the whole piece, how does it fit? It's really important to think about your piece in larger units, like maybe 4-bar units or 8-bar units or whatever. Like what's the larger pattern? Are your notes going somewhere? And if you think about when you're reading a novel, there's always a setup and then not always, I mean most of the time, there's always going to be like some sort of introduction, some sort of setup, then like a climactic moment where everything culminates, and then like a denouement or however you pronounce like the come down from the climax. And this is the same kind of thing that you'll see in a lot of music. And these are larger patterns. So I mean, you're not going to hit a climactic moment in just 1 bar of music, but maybe after 20 bars of music, you've built to some kind of like, climactic point. As another example, I want to compare this to poetry, actually. So if you're just writing a simple 4-line poem, you need to consider it as like a whole. So as the whole 4 lines, not just 1 line at a time. So for the sake of an example, I have composed a masterpiece. So, I mean, obviously, this is right up there with William Blake, but I'll just read it quickly just so you can hear it being said. Summer's last tomato is bursting from the vine. Patiently I've waited, and finally it's mine. So let's look at this a little bit closer. First of all, you've got the rhyming scheme. So these I'm just going to label as B. This would be A. This would be C. This is just like basic poetry labeling. The B's are identical because vine, mine, there's your rhyme. So another consideration we're going to look at, and this adds to the flow, is how many syllables each line is. So summer's last tomato, that would be 6, and then this one's also 6, and this one's also 6, and this one's also 6. So the fact that the rhythm is basically equal every single time makes it really easy to speak, and it also creates a sense of unity. You'll also see if you look at the first 2 lines and then the second 2 lines, this is like 1 sentence, and this is a second sentence. So there's just another sort of like mid-sized pattern in the whole thing. So now I want to show you the same poem, but I've kind of like messed with it a little bit and took away the syllable pattern, and I took away the rhyme scheme. Okay, so this one, summer's last tomato is bursting with ripeness, red and round. I've been waiting to eat it like an apple. So there isn't any rhyme, obviously. There isn't any consistency with syllables. Like, it's really random. So the first one, just like the other one, is 6, but then we have one that's 9 syllables, then 4 syllables, then 7. So it doesn't roll off the tongue as easily. It just kind of feels like a clumsy couple sentences. I mean, there's also lots of amazing poetry that doesn't use a standard rhyming scheme or a syllable pattern. Like there's that super famous poem, This Is Just to Say, that is a classic. But even though in this poem there's like no rhymes or anything, there's still a masterful sense of style here. And there's an overall unity when you look at it. Like you've got 3 stanzas that are all pretty equal in length. Now, I know that was a bit of a tangent, but it's important because melodies work in the same way as poetry. So let's take a look at this really, really simple melody that we've already been talking about. So you'll notice the song is mostly divided in 6-bar sections. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I've got this kind of like double bar to basically indicate that you're starting a new section. Now you'll notice this when I play it, but every time you have this like start of a section again, it's basically the same tune again as the beginning, but just like with more stuff added. So the first time you've just got this like simple melody, it's all one note at a time. The second time you've got some extra notes in there, it's basically the same melody, but just like a little bit more harmony stuck in there. The third time you get to it, there's some 16th notes added and stuff like that, just to make it a little busier. And all of this is just like slowly piecing it together and adding momentum so that by the time when you get to the final section with all these descending 16th notes, it really does feel like a climactic moment. So that was kind of my way of building up to this point. And all of this just ends up, well, hopefully anyway, making the song sound deliberate. Like I chose it to be that way. It's not just random. There's a clear goal, like the louder 16th note part right here, it is the goal, and there's a clear path of getting there. It isn't just like suddenly really loud and fast. So let's just reiterate these 3 points for songwriting. So keep it simple, include rhythm patterns, and look at the forest, not just the trees. So before you get cracking, I'm gonna play through this tune, like my pentatonic song, so you can hear it, and I want you to listen for all of these songwriting elements that we've been talking about. Okay, so now it is your turn. You can go to blanksheetmusic.net if you want to print off just like whatever type of blank sheet music you want to use, or you can just say like, I'm not using sheet music and make up your own code in a notebook or whatever you want to do. When I'm making sheet music, I use MuseScore, which is a free open source program that you can download that lets you like type up the notes and everything. And obviously you don't have to get that fancy, but that's what I use. And the style can be whatever you want it to be too. Like my song was really kind of like mellow and gentle. You could do like something fast and boppy or dark and intense or like whatever floats your boat. Just remember, keep it simple and stick to the black keys and you really can't go wrong, honestly. Good luck with these adventures. Thank you for watching this video. Give it a like if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys next time. Melody writing is a massive topic and there's like huge thick books talking